There's that old saying. I say it's an old saying, but the chances are I've probably just made this up. Future World Champion drive. The sort of performance that a particular driver will put on that makes you go, if you give that guy the right car, there's every chance that in the future he could be a world champion. Like I say, I've probably just made that up, but it's something to consider nonetheless. Let's take a look at some examples here. Now, if I've not mentioned the one that you were thinking of, relax. I've not forgotten anybody, nor have I deliberately left something out because I'm a hater. There's Jenson Button at Hungary in 2006, Kimi Raikkonen at Suzuka 2005, Hamilton at Fuji 2007, which is something that needs to be a video in the future because that win gets slept on. Vettel at Monza 2008, Verstappen at Brazil 2016, even if he didn't actually win that race, and Damon Hill at Japan in 1994. Like I said, these are just some examples. You don't have to rip my head off because I left out your guy. Has Charles Leclerc had his yet? Answers on a postcard. But one driver on the grid that might have had his future world champion drive was Lando Norris just this weekend at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I'm probably exaggerating, but engagement is engagement. But there might be method to my madness here, because the way he clawed his way back through the field to end up finishing where he finished was something that you would argue would be something that he needs to do more often. Not coming through the field, but, being aggressive and assertive and just going for it instead of being a little bit tiptoey, I think is the word. Allow me to explain. But in a way, Norris probably shouldn't have been as far back as he started at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix on the streets of Baku. During the first qualifying session, yellow flags were displayed while Lando was on his second hot lap of the session, when those yellow flags shouldn't have been there. By the time Norris arrived at turn 16, those yellow flags are cleared, being replaced with a white flag, which means slow moving car on track. This might confuse American viewers because in NASCAR and IndyCar, the white flag means one more lap to run, but at the same time, blue flags are advisory over there. So seeing the yellow flags flashing away up ahead, Lando lifted, which is what racing drivers are hardwired to do. Yellow means slow down, so he did. But on this occasion he didn't actually need to because they cleared when he arrived, but at those speeds it's better to be safe than sorry. McLaren and the FIA have been holding talks to try and work out a future solution for all this because it's not the first time that the wrong flags have been displayed. Norris, annoyingly for him and McLaren, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So it meant that instead of being at least third on the grid, you would think that given how rapid that car is at the minute, but it could have been on pole. Who knows? Lando would start 16th, promoted up from 17th when Gasly was disqualified for a technical infringement. Well, he actually technically started 15th because Hamilton started from the pit lane. Sure, Lando could have just blasted through those yellows, but it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. Lift, and you're out of the first qualifying session. Blast through, hoping it's wrong when it turns out to be right, and you're kicked out of qualifying, you're getting points on your licence, and other sanctions. But as it was, a white flag for the slow-moving Alpine would have been enough. No need for the yellow. So on this occasion, at least, it wasn't McLaren's fault. And when I say McLaren's fault, I'm talking about the other dropped points and lost wins that they've had over the course of this season already. But that shouldn't take away everything that Piastri did in qualifying. Leclerc was bloody rapid, as he often is at Baku, and this being despite Charles walling his car in practice earlier in the weekend. Having seen how rapid the Ferrari was at Monza with its new floor, I was waiting to see how things would change at a track that's a bit more on the bumpy side and would test the upgraded floor that was designed to reduce the porpoising that Ferrari has been experiencing since the botched Spanish Grand Prix upgrades that came at the beginning of May. Oscar splitting the two Ferraris was a good start, especially since Max was going to be starting back in 6th and Perez in 4th. Somehow. Red Bull had also changed some things around a bit on their car. One part was a new front wing and the other was a subtle change to the floor to increase volume expansion. Those being Gary Anderson's words, not mine, as Red Bull tried to keep the grip in the slower speed corners around Baku. It's a bit of a strange one, this track. It's got that absolutely mental run towards the start-finish line where cars will be going above 200 miles an hour, but the rest of it is twisty, so getting the balance right is going to be tricky. Apparently Red Bull had to modify an existing floor to be able to pull this off. Pre-budget cap they would have just sprayed the money up the wall and got a brand new floor for both cars, but now they've got to be a little bit more careful, especially with the already botched upgrades that they've brought over the course of the season, so any upgrades that Red Bull do from now on, including the front wing that they brought for this particular Grand Prix, they're going to be a lot more subtle than some of the other teams that might have a little bit more money to spend. So with the race getting going, if Lando wanted to keep his slim title chances alive, he'd have to go all out to try and get in front of Verstappen. Now this is where things could go very well with a bit of luck, or go even worse with a bit of luck. Given that Baku is basically a faster Monaco, the walls are inviting, and drivers that try to take the piss are just going to end up tagging them and bringing out a safety car. Or worse, a driver is going to end up hitting a wall and taking another car with them. And with Norris being near the back of the grid, there's every chance that he could have ended up in somebody else's accident. Ideally, he needed to get into the top 10, maybe the top 7, and hope for a safety car, which is very possible at Baku. Meanwhile, Verstappen was confident that Red Bull had improved the car, but it might be hard to tell given that Baku isn't necessarily the best test of a car upgrade, especially on Red Bull's front. Baku is mostly short, snappy 90-degree corners, something that seems to work with Perez's driving style but not with Max's. Although Max had made a couple of changes to his car after the third practice session that might have knocked him back a tiny bit. Will Singapore be a similar story since that is also mostly 90-degree corners? Who knows at this point? McLaren and Ferrari should be strong there as well. And all this might be why Perez was up at the pointy end of the grid at the end of qualifying, because Baku seems to lend itself more to his driving style than Max's, and Perez has always gone well at Baku. But staying with Singapore for a second, that track is quite bumpy, something that Red Bull absolutely hates. Has to be said though that on the first lap the Red Bull seemed to be in the right zone. Both of them made a position up, with Perez getting past Sainz and Verstappen getting by Russell. The Williams cars were in the top 10 as well, and that's encouraging considering Williams was a one-man team for the first 66% or so of this season. But Perez up to third meant that it might have been a three-way scrap for a win. After 2 laps, Norris was getting close to the top 10. He was in 12th, so had made up 3 spots, and that doesn't seem impressive, but the way he was trying to get by people showed a certain aggression that he never seemed to have up to this point. Memes have been made about him going backwards at race starts, something that has been an issue for him every time he started on pole, because he's never finished the first lap of a race in the lead. But if Lando really wants to take the fight to Max, it's what he needs to do. Okay, doing it against Tsunoda, Hülkenberg and Gasly is a bit different to doing it against Leclerc, Verstappen and Russell, but it's a start. On lap 15, Lando had got up to 5th thanks to the pit cycle, and Perez had come out of the pits behind the McLaren. The Mexican Minister of Defense was put into a position where he'd be held up by Lando to protect Oscar from the Red Bull when he pitted, which kind of makes all of this "so Lando is number 1, Oscar is number 2" talk from the other day seem completely pointless, really. But it did help Oscar in the end, as he came out of the pits ahead of Perez just as Checo overtook Lando on the main straight. While on the subject of tyres, Hamilton starting the Grand Prix on mediums seemed a bit of a weird call, considering he'd started from the pit lane. Surely he should have gone onto the hards and gone as deep as he possibly could into the race. But what baffles me is how fast Piastri got onto the back of Leclerc. After the race, Leclerc said that the Ferrari setup wasn't optimised for the hard tyres, and hadn't been able to do any hard running in practice because he'd crashed. In 4 laps, Oscar had overhauled an 8-second lead or so, and passed Charles with a dive bomb that was right on the edge of not going well, as Oscar was a hair's width from hitting that Tech Pro on the outside of turn 1. It was cool to watch them duking it out for position along the next straight, but Oscar seemed to have it all under control. Leclerc was totally not expecting that move, because he didn't really defend into one and it caught him with his trousers down. But by lap 23 it was Oscar, Charles and Checo separated by just over a second and a half, with Albon in 4th although he hadn't pitted yet. At just before the halfway point, it could be any of those 3 drivers at the front winning the Grand Prix if things went one way or the other, with Verstappen a net 6th behind them. Oscar and Charles battling into turn 1 on multiple occasions was great defending on Oscar's part, and even with the battling, Checo was out of the DRS range of them both. Something else to note here is that the 2 Williams cars were still within the top 10. If everything went smoothly for the rest of the Grand Prix, both of them would be in the points, and that would help James Vowles and team justify getting rid of Logan Sargent before the season was over. But one other thing that's interesting to note here is that on lap 34, Lando still hadn't pitted. He'd been battling a little bit with Max, who had made his pit stop and was on much fresher rubber, but Lando managed to pull away to the tune of 2 seconds, on much older tyres. They were both on hards, but Lando's were way older, and then Max was overtaken by George. So whatever Red Bull did to that car after the third practice session, it wasn't working. Norris pitted on lap 38, which dropped him down to 7th and about 15 seconds behind Verstappen. Within 14 laps, that gap had been chipped away to the tune of around a second a lap, and Lando was able to pass Max into turn 1, which seemed to be the main action zone of the race given the DRS overspeed there being insane, as Oscar showed with his lunge on Charles. But while there was the fight between Lando and Max, with Lando now about 2 seconds off George and that gap might be chipped away as well, there was a three-way scrap for second taking place, because Leclerc, Perez and Sainz all wanted that spot. Piastri had pulled the gap out to about 4 seconds by the time lap 50 started, but behind him Leclerc was defending from Perez, with Checo looking to go round the outside. Leclerc defended incredibly well, slowing Perez down enough for Sainz to have a go past the Red Bull, but it looked like Sainz wanted the position from Charles as well, which then allowed Checo the opportunity back into turn 2. On the exit, it was a drag race between Sainz and Checo, and the two touched, with the Ferrari and Red Bull embedded in the wall. This all happening less than a minute after I tweeted the words to the effect of, "Oh wow, Checo's turned up today, what the hell's going on here?" Yeah, I spoke too soon. Checo did turn up, but he turned up into a wall. So who do you blame for that then? It's like Carlos moved slightly left, but Checo moved slightly right. It's hard to tell, but from the initial viewings I've had of that footage, it appears that Checo moves right more than Carlos moves left, but it's one of those things where the more you watch it, the less it appears that way. Checo seemed to be of the opinion that Carlos was to blame, while Sainz seemed completely dumbfounded over what had happened. But that's one for you to argue about in the comments section, I guess. And it is a shame because for the first time in a very, 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 very long time, Checo was faster than Max, balked setups notwithstanding. But with all that out of the way, Piastri went on to take the victory and it kind of settled the score after what had happened in Hungary a while back. Yes, this ended under virtual safety car, which means he didn't get it under green flag conditions, and that kind of made it a gift, if you will, but there's no denying that he deserved it and took it incredibly well. That overtake on Leclerc, managing the pace and then pulling away as Leclerc's tyres dropped off. Oscar's now fully established himself as one of F1's young up-and-comers. As his manager Mark Webber would say, not bad for a number 2 driver. But for Lando, meanwhile, this is what he needed. I've said before a few times that he lacks that inner bastard that you need to have to be a champion, and he managed to drive through the field, catch Max, get in front, pit, and then catch and pass him again. He did what he needed to do, but it makes you wonder what his day might have been like if not for that qualifying mare he had on Saturday. Most likely, he'd have started ahead of Max and managed to outscore him by a bigger margin than he did yesterday. For Russell, he might be wondering how he lucked into a 3rd place, being in a prime position to take the podium from the Perez-Sainz collision in the same way that he won the Austrian Grand Prix when Verstappen and Norris crashed into each other. So if anything, this season is having shades of 2009. Remember how utterly dominant Button and Brawn were in the opening stages of the season with that double diffuser, but they lacked the budget to do more with the car in terms of upgrading it. There are parallels to be drawn here, only in Red Bull's case it's a mix of their off-track scuffles, losing Newey, botched upgrades, the asymmetric brake pedal conspiracies and everything else in between. In Brawn's case, by the time their advantage had gone, Red Bull couldn't take enough out of Jensen for Seb to win the title come the end, and Brawn would also take the Constructors' Championship. In this case, McLaren and Ferrari are taking points off each other, Oscar and Lando are taking points off each other, and this is allowing Max to keep his lead safer than some might have thought his lead might be, given now McLaren have probably the fastest car, and Ferrari look to have made strides forward too. Somebody else did the maths for me. If Lando wants to win this, although his chances are slim and Max will still probably win the Drivers' Championship, Lando needs to outscore Max by at least 9 points a race with the remaining 206 points on the table, that being for winning races, taking fastest laps and also the sprints. If Leclerc wants it, he's got to overhaul Max by 11 points a race, Piastri 13. Not impossible, but highly improbable. Unless Max walls it at Singapore in the race when the car refuses to turn, in which case that could be an easy 25-point gain for Norris. But essentially, if Max doesn't have a repeat of Hungary for every race between now and Abu Dhabi, the title is his. But at the same time, there's still every possibility that Ferrari could push Red Bull down into 3rd in the Constructors at the end of the season. Ed Straw has said that Lando taking points off Max has been glacial. What he needs is an avalanche. What also needs to be pointed out here is that Williams managed to score a double points finish with Albon in 7th and Colapinto in 8th. Colapinto scoring more points in 2 races than Sargent could in 2 years, which is fantastic progress for the team. With Sainz in that car next year, they should be able to get a bit more out of things. At least, you'd hope. I'd hope. It's just good to see Williams scoring again. Watch as they do nothing for the rest of the year now. Oh, and Behrman too, standing in for the banned Kevin Magnussen, and with him in that Haas next year, it'll be a chance for him to show what he's capable of over a full season. I said in a previous video, I can't remember which one it was, that I've been very impressed with Piastri this season. I'm interested to see how far he goes. Could he be a champion one day? But the way Lando drove at Baku, that's kind of the opening he needs for him to start driving like that while he's at the front, being more racy, not being too cautious on the opening lap. That drive through the field shows that when he needs to, he can do it. But can he do it more than just this time? We'll have to find out. Because if the rumours are true about what Mark Webber has put into Oscar's contract, it could well be that it's Oscar that McLaren throws its weight behind over the next couple of years. So then, a look at yesterday's Azerbaijan Grand Prix and my opinions on what happened during the race and everything else that I could think of. If any of this has given you food for thought and you like some of the points I made, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the fine bunch of lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support the channel at a more personal level, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and bobs that you might want or need to know, along with links to my affiliates where if you buy stuff, I get a kickback. There's also memberships if Patreon isn't your thing but you still want to help out, and there's also super thanks if you just want to buy me a coffee. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.